The Kansas City Chiefs are looking to three-peat for the first time in NFL history, but there are some dark horse competitors that are going to look to ruin their plans. That's coming up on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to this Friday episode of Locked On NFL, your daily podcast covering the National Football League, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. I'm David Harrison. He is Tony Wiggins. We are your normal Friday duo, even though we haven't been your Friday duo for like 3 weeks or so now, Tony. But we are back this week. Both of us credentialed member of the media. He's covering the Jaguars. I'm covering the Washington Commanders. Locked On Jags, Locked On Commanders is where you can find both of us 5 days a week. Locked On NFL is here for you also 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And everydayers, you already know because we tell you every day, but we love you. We appreciate your continued support for this network and every show that you listen to. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. On today's episode of Locked On NFL, we are telling you who our favorite quarterback prospects are in a vacuum. We're not talking about team fits. We're not talking about team situations, context, none of that. Just raw prospect. Who is your favorite prospect in this quarterback class in the NFL draft? I think we're going to have some interesting conversations surrounding that. We're also going to talk about who the biggest losers could be in the NFL this coming season and have control of that number one overall pick in 2025 and potentially draft their next franchise quarterback. But Wig, we're going to start this thing off with the team that we feel like who was not in the Super Bowl last year. So no Chiefs, no San Francisco 49ers. I don't know why I almost said Chargers, but no San Francisco 49ers. The Chiefs obviously are looking to three-peat, be the first team in NFL history to do it. And you know what? It was the franchise that was the first back-to-back Super Bowl winner. So wouldn't it just be fitting in history for them to be the first three-peat franchise in NFL history? But nobody wants to see that happen outside of Kansas City. So who is your non-Super Bowl contender from 2023 that could unseat them in 2024?
I'm going to Cleveland. That's right.
Nice.
I'm going with the Cleveland Browns. And the reason why is because I was pleasantly surprised with the way Coach Stefanski coached last year with the injuries, with Deshaun Watson not being available. I do remember this, though. I remember right at the very end, like the game before Watson actually was down for the year, he played lights out, and he started looking like the Deshaun Watson of old. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, they got some bad luck. I hear he's working his butt off this offseason, and they're going to get Nick Chubb back at some point. They tasted it a little bit last year. It's almost like the other night when I watched LeBron on the bench and I watched the Lakers win without him. Now everybody realizes what they can do, and Watson realizes what they can do without him. He doesn't have to come in here and earn that $230 million guaranteed all in one season. All you got to do, man, is just come in there and not screw this up. They added some help in Jerry Jeudy, who's a really good, crisp route runner to go along with Amari Cooper. They might be the two best route runners on air in the National Football League that are on the same team. David Njoku finally took that step. And, of course, their defense is led by they got a great cornerback. They have probably the best edge rusher or one of the 2 or 3 best edge rushers in the league in Myles Garrett. I just think this team, with this draft coming up, even though they're going to pick their first pick in the second round, I just think that they are a team that nobody wants to really be trying to deal with. If all of those parts come together, along with the coaching and the continuity now, because they're not continuing to add all of these new pieces. They have their ball club, and they made a playoff run last year with a bunch of injuries. And remember, this game is won or lost on the trenches, and they have a good defensive line and they have a good offensive line. And I really, really do believe that they are set up, even though they play in a tough division, maybe the toughest one, especially with Joe Burrow coming back. They play in a real tough division. I think they're built for it. I honestly think they are built for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid point. And I do really think that tough division is key there, because it's kind of twofold, right? It's like the SEC in college football. Like if you come out of the SEC and you come out of it the victors, the champions, or at least even and with the new playoff system, not that this is locked on college football, but since I brought it up, with the new playoff system, you just got to get in the tournament, right? But if you can get out of it healthy and have that experience from playing through that tough schedule, it can really catapult you in the postseason. I think the AFC North is very similar to that. Cleveland Browns don't necessarily need to win the division, although they would obviously love to. But if you come out of that division with a playoff spot and relatively healthy, then I think you're right, man. I think they're a very dangerous team because you look at what they did with backup quarterbacks. Most teams in the NFL will tell you, well, maybe not, honestly, but behind closed doors anyway, out of camera sight, will tell you that if your starting quarterback goes down, your season's pretty much done. Like from that point, like you're going to try to stay competitive, obviously, and the owner's going to want a competitive roster and all that stuff. But for the most part, if your starting quarterback goes down, it's pretty much game over, right? Like the Brock Purdy's of the world don't come around every single year. And even like the Joe Flacco's of the world don't come around every single year. I think what this team has done, you mentioned all those additions, has gone out and tried to make this team as quarterback proof as it possibly could, because they kind of looked at it and said, you know what, look at what we were able to do with our roster, even without Chubb and even with Joe Flacco. Think what we could do if we go add a guy like Judy. Let's make this defense even better. And you mentioned they only had their first draft pick right now comes on day 2, but there's a lot of talent in this room, in this group. And I think if you go and address the running back room, not necessarily to replace Chubb, obviously once he comes back, he's going to be your dude, but go get someone to complement him. And if I'm the Browns, I'd probably go after 2 young guys, one that's more of a power back, one that's more of a scat back, receiving back type of guy to really complement Nick Chubb. And even when he does get back on the field, let him roll in easy. So I think you're spot on, Wig. I really like what the Browns have done. And you know what? Even if they got to turn to Jameis Winston at some point in time, if they put enough weapons and a good enough defense on the field, they could do something that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were never able to do. So I like that pick. I'm actually going the NFC side of things, so this works beautifully because we did not plan that, and I think that's really authentic, but also really cool. And it's a little bit low-hanging fruit, right? But I'm going Detroit Lions because I think they did a lot of good stuff last year. I think they really embraced the persona of their head coach and Dan Campbell, and I think that that's only going to grow this year. And I think that they'll never say this up front, but I think going into last season, there were still some questions about Jared Goff and whether or not he could be the right guy because his personality couldn't be more night and day than his head coaches. But it's kind of like, you know what, we can let Dan be that guy, and then Jared can just go out there and be the business suit guy that just finalizes the meeting, right? And I think this year, you're going to see a Lions team that comes in and really has bought into what Jared Goff can do in this system, with this style of play, with these coaches, with these players. And then you look at what they've done. They've gone out and, I know Marcus Davenport's career hasn't really gone the way that it possibly could, but if there's a coaching staff that can get the best out of Marcus, it's this one. You have to like the offensive line addition of Kevin Zeitler. Cornerback Carlton Davis, I'll tell you right now, like when the Buccaneers won the Super Bowl, that secondary's nickname was the Grave Diggers. So tell me that the Grave Diggers does not, like that nickname does not fit a Dan Campbell-led football team. Carlton Davis is going to bring a lot of physicality to that secondary and do a lot of good things. And then, like you just mentioned with the Browns, they've got the NFL draft to go out and get even better. So I really like what the Detroit Lions are doing. That division, unlike the AFC North, I think looks a little bit more wide open. See what the Packers and Jordan Love can do. But now that people kind of see Jordan Love coming, I think things might get a little bit harder for him. I love the addition of Josh Jacobs there. The Bears, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I don't think that they're just going to have a 1 year, turn it around and get it done, even with 2 top 10 picks in the NFL draft. And the Minnesota Vikings, man, I don't even know right now what to make of the Minnesota Vikings. We'll see what happens through the rest of this offseason. But yeah, man, I think the Detroit Lions have a little bit easier path to the playoffs maybe than that AFC North team. But I think once they get into the tournament, depending on the draws, again, depending on health, I think the Lions can make a lot of noise this offseason or this season.
I do too. What Detroit has to do, I saw enough games where some games they lost where all they had to do was make two routine plays and they win. Well, then that showed itself up in the NFC Championship game. Like they were making a bunch of big plays. They have to learn to make the small ones. And a team that plays the way that they play, they should be making small plays because they're all about they're just gritty and and it's like leaving no meat on the bone. It just has to become something that they do routinely, like a computer program. I'll solve your Cleveland running back situation when you say power and scat back. Trey Benson at Florida State, there he is. He's Le'Veon Bell all over again. He can run with power. He's 220 pounds, but once he breaks through, he's gone. And if you hit him on a screen pass, he is real dangerous in open field. So you get 2 for 1 right there with Trey Benson in Cleveland. There you go.
There you go. That's a nice pick. And I'll tell you right now, the Cleveland Browns would love to have the next Le'Veon Bell be on their side for once instead of on the Pittsburgh side of things. But next, we're going to talk about the opposite side of the spectrum. Talk about a dark horse Super Bowl candidate. Let's talk about, I don't know their dark horse, but let's talk about that number 1 candidate, number 1 pick candidate for 2025. who could be the worst teams, at least in record book, which is what people say you are, right? You are what your record says you are. Who could those teams be? We'll talk about that next, coming up on Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel, who wants you to say goodbye to those busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game in the tournament, which means every round, every game, you could be a winner, even if your favorite team is not a winner or is already eliminated, or like my Ohio State Buckeyes, never even in the main tournament to begin with. Whether you're betting on a big upset or that number one seed, it is time to go dancing with America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to spend on point spreads, money lines, anything you can think of on FanDuel. Who's going to win it all? Future Super Bowl bets, whatever you want, if your first $5 bet wins. The UConn men and the South Carolina women are still favorites in their respective brackets. So if you want to ride those number one picks all the way through, you can go ahead and do that. Number one seeds. We're not talking NFL draft. We're talking basketball tournaments. So much things you can do on FanDuel.com. So many things you can do at FanDuel.com. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Bet on college hoops so they cut down the nets, or your NFL futures. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NFL. Thanks again for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day today and every day. Everydayers, thank you once again for coming through here. Tony Wiggins, David Harrison here with you. Make sure you all come back on Monday. Kevin Ostreicher, Locked On Ravens, will be holding it down, talking about the biggest stories around the NFL. In the meantime, if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, do you find yourself having to turn it down a little bit when all the screaming starts? Well, if you do, make the switch over to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. It's free. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wig, we talked about our dark horse Super Bowl candidates, and look, I'm aware I might catch some flack of that because, like, the Detroit Lions should have been in Super Bowl, right? Like that, they had that game in hand and they messed it up. They kind of threw it away. But you know what? They didn't make it, so they count. Who, on the other hand, because there's some low hanging fruit here for the NFL draft next year for having the number one overall pick. Are you going low hanging fruit, or do you have a wild take for us? Who do you think is the prime contender in your eyes to have that number one overall pick that the Carolina Panthers earned and gave away to the Chicago Bears?
Well, you just said it basically, but for I will mention. Okay, so this is the part where I cheat a little bit, right? Carolina is the obvious choice. And I just want to say this real quick. Everyone says that they got rid of the wrong guy. Like, why did you keep DJ Moore? And the Bears wanted Brian Burns. Well, conventional wisdom tells you in the NFL that a pass rusher is worth way more. A young pass rusher is worth way more than a young wide receiver. And if CJ Stroud was the pick and he played well, nobody be saying they traded the wrong guy, right? And what they gave up would have been fine. I'm not done with Bryce yet, so I'm going to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But let me tell you something, man. I don't know what they're doing, and Dave Canales better be a hell of a play caller, but I'm going to pick another team because that's too easy, okay?
I agree.
In the same division, I think the New Orleans Saints are in trouble because I think they have exercised. I'm sorry, Ross Jackson, Locked On Saints. You my dog. I love you. We're going to go to Drago's when I come up there and eat some char-grilled oysters and all of that in New Orleans. But let me explain something to you. They approach this offseason like a team that is trying to be just good enough to save their coach's job. And that is always a very, very dangerous thing because you don't do things that are responsible, right? And they keep kicking the can down the road. And at some point, somebody's going to pay for it. I don't think they've necessarily hit on these drafts, especially in the early rounds the last few years. Ever since they made that trade for Marcus Davenport, we just talked about it. It just doesn't work. You know, the things they've done haven't worked. The offensive line is in shambles. They got a lot of injury concerns. Some of their key players are getting old. Demario Davis, Alvin Kamara. And I just don't believe in Derek Carr, dog. I think the best quarterback they had on the team last year is not backing up Deshaun Watson in Cleveland. So I'm just not a believer. I'm not a believer in the situation. I'm not a believer in anything. And I really do think, and I know this is my opinion, that hanging on to Dennis Allen this long, their head coach is probably the dude that should be the head coach is the defensive coordinator in Jacksonville, is Ryan Nielsen. That's what they should have got. They should have went out and made a move and got a young guy like that. Dennis Allen, to me, is full of coach speak. He hasn't proven that he's a real good head coach in this league. This is his second stop, and I think it's going to end bad for New Orleans, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can see it too, and I'll tell you, Derek Carr, I agree. I think that his best days are behind him. I think his best season was that year that he unfortunately had the leg injury, and I think from there on, I don't want to say it's been completely downhill, but I think that's been the top of his performance and his ability, and in this league, look, I mean, you look at the NFL draft class as we're talking about, and we're going to talk about the quarterbacks here in just a little bit, but having that ability to extend the play, having that ability to create on your own and create explosive plays. We've talked about this on this show before, Wig, where you kind of look at point guards that used to be, you could be the John Stockton or you could be the Steve Kerr. Well, now you kind of have to be the Steph Curry, right? Like you have to be the guy that can create on his own on the field. Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. And that's where guys like Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, even Drake May with 10 years ago, he's one of the most athletic quarterbacks in the NFL. Today, he's one of the middle of the pack athletic quarterbacks in the NFL. But that shows you how much athleticism they're expecting these quarterbacks to have, and Derek Carr just doesn't have it.
And he's always yelling. He's always yelling at his teammates. And when you get into the business of screaming and yelling at your teammate, you better be good. You better
Tom Brady.
You better be above reproach when it comes to doing that, because if not, that's not going to. And I saw the body language. I saw people looking at him with the side eye last year, like, dude, who you talking to? And that's always a problem for me. And it's probably something that you can't come back from.
And I'll tell you, like I said, you better be Tom Brady if you're going to be doing that mess, especially in front of the national cameras. But even Tom Brady, his final year in Tampa, guys weren't feeling the getting yelled at on the field and on the sidelines in front of the cameras. I'll tell you that right now. So even Tom Brady, there's a limit there, and Derek Carr has not been Tom Brady. So certainly a more than or less than low hanging fruit type of pick. I like that pick. I'm going to go with a pick that maybe not necessarily as spicy as the New Orleans Saints, who were competing for a division title. Granted, the worst division in the NFL last year, but we're competing for a division title last year. But I'm going to go with the Las Vegas Raiders. And it pains me to say that because I want Coach Pierce to be uber successful. And I'm really praying that the Las Vegas Raiders organization and their ownership are looking at Coach Pierce as more than just, dude, you got to prove it in one season or less that we made the right decision or we're going to move on from you, because I would hate to see that happen to him. And I just look at this team and I just wonder, look, they got a little bit better on defense, I feel like, this offseason. I went out and got one of my favorite free agents, surprise free agent, Christian Wilkins out of Miami. But I don't think that that's going to be enough. You lose Josh Jacobs, and I wonder what's going to be the quarterback situation. And with the Minnesota Vikings obviously making a strong push to try to get one of those guys, I just feel like the Raiders are in a situation where they're going to potentially be reaching for a young guy like Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr. and not be ready to facilitate that type of a move and sacrifice getting a player that could maybe build for their team into the future. So I'm going to be really interested to see what they do with the rest of the offseason and in April in the NFL draft, because I feel like their roster is in a very purgatory-like situation, and I don't like it when you have a coach like Antonio Pierce who, as much as a lot of us rallied for him to lose that interim tag, I think there's a lot of people on the outside looking in that look at him as kind of this type of coach who's like, are you really are they really invested in you, or was this more of a let's make everybody happy in a PR move after what happened with their last interim coach? They let him bounce, and then the debacle that followed that. So I think there's some strings attached here. I really hope the organization is doing right by Coach Pierce, because I think Coach Pierce is going to need a couple of years to really get this thing going. And if he has that security blanket, maybe he doesn't feel like he has to reach for the 5th or 6th quarterback off the board.
Yeah, what they do in the draft is going to really tell you and answer your question about what you think that they feel about him, because if it's the opposite of what I just said about Dennis Allen, like just trying to prove that he's the guy, right? Mm-hmm. If they build this, if they use the draft to really, really build an infrastructure and make choices that are going to help their future, then they're going to have Pierce right there. Because you remember they let Herman Edwards do that in Kansas City, and then they fired him when he did all of the things that you were supposed to do. Well, this is a first-year hire. If they do the things that you're supposed to do that aren't sexy, that's going to cause them to take a step back, that could actually be a plus instead of reaching for a quarterback. Although I do have a little surprise for you when it comes to quarterbacks.
All right, speaking of those quarterbacks, look, maybe the Raiders, maybe they're not reaching the 5th or 6th quarterback off the board. We'll see. We're going to talk about vacuum rankings in the quarterback class of the NFL draft coming up. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On NFL. Thanks again, everydayers, for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day every day. Wig, we're going to talk about quarterback rankings, right? But we're not talking about who fits with the Bears, who fits with the Commanders, who fits with the Patriots, all that. We're talking about just raw athletes in a vacuum. We're ranking these quarterbacks. You can go as deep as you want, Wig. I was planning on going to the top 4, but I want to see what your ranking are. I want to see where you're ranking. I want to see where the surprises coming. So in a vacuum, just pure quarterback prospects, give us your rankings in this quarterback class.
You ready?
Yep.
Caleb Williams is number 1.
Okay.
Jaden Daniels is number 2. A close third from Michael Penix.
Oh.
Then J.J. McCarthy.
Okay.
And the Raiders might be the happiest team on earth that I said this. I think Drake May is the 5th best quarterback. That's me. I know that's not what's going to happen on draft night. Right. In my opinion. And now we can look at all the big boards and people can say, Wig, you're crazy. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Go look at a big board, your favorite big board from a year ago, from 2 years ago, from 3 years ago. Now go back and look at the players. I guarantee you the way that I'm thinking is something that could be proved by evidence and fact that players don't always achieve what those big boards say they're going to achieve, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of guys like Puka Nacua would be a top 15 pick this year, okay? And I know a lot of that has to do with what team he goes to and what teams and what program these guys go to. And I get all of that, right?
Right.
But I am still sitting here telling you that, in my opinion, Michael Penix will be the 3rd most successful quarterback in this draft. Does that bode well for a team like the Raiders who might feel the same way and snatch him up at 13 and then they're not really reaching? Because he ran a 4.46 today. That shocked me, right? Yeah. And I know you don't want your quarterback to be running, but you do want him to have a getaway car. Right. And I'm not a big Drake May fan. I keep telling people I tried so hard to see it because I was afraid of it because I'm an FSU supporter and I did not want them to get clipped in the ACC championship game by him. When I watched him intently, I wasn't afraid of him at all if North Carolina was going to get there. So that lack of fear of him and the pop that I just don't see in his game makes me rank him as the 5th best quarterback. And that's how I'm going to stand on that. I'm 10 toes in. I'm standing on that. I'm standing on business, as the young people say.
I like it. I like it. And again, like you mentioned, like a lot of these guys, their success, and then you can talk big boards, you can talk about all these rankings, right? But the success that happens is going to depend a lot on where they went. And I've had that conversation on my Locked On Commanders show because obviously I'm talking quarterbacks a lot on that show with the Commanders having the number 2 overall pick. And I talked about my concerns over the Chicago Bears taking a guy like Caleb Williams, who just had a guy like Justin Fields and definitely did not do everything necessary to facilitate a successful environment around Justin Fields. So what makes us think that they're going to do it for Caleb Williams? So we'll see. Hopefully for Caleb's sake, it does happen. I will tell you right now that I don't have Caleb Williams as my number 1 quarterback in this class. I mean, that's probably the biggest surprise on my list. My number 1 quarterback in this class is actually Jaden Daniels. And I think that Jaden Daniels, the question about Jaden Daniels has always been, what can he do versus what was he asked to do, right? So you see some things missing from his tape, or at least not showing up as much on his tape. I'm talking about middle of the field throws, especially in the intermediate part of the field. You don't see a lot of those in his tape from LSU or even Arizona State. The question has always been, do they not do it because he can't do it, or do they not do it just because they didn't ask him to do it? And when you have a weapon like Jaden Daniels, especially in the college games where things so much more spread out already, why wouldn't you vacate the middle of the field, force the defense to vacate the middle of the field, and open up lanes for a guy like Jaden Daniels to run through, right? So now, I don't know if that's exactly what it was, but I think he showed some good stuff at his pro day. I think he was able to kind of silence some of those, not silence them, but answer a few of those questions. And I think his athletic upside is what, to me, makes him the number 1 quarterback prospect in this year's class. The other part of it, which is super unfair to Caleb Williams, and I'm going to own that. I'm going to admit that and own that right now. When I watch Jaden Daniels, all of the things he does, all the highlight things that he does, and some of the crazy throws and some of the crazy runs, they feel natural. It feels like it's just Jaden playing ball as Jaden plays ball. When I watch Caleb Williams, Wig, I see this dude sometimes, and he makes a sidearm throw for no reason. He leans on one foot, his body's at a 45-degree angle making a throw for no reason. And it just feels to me that Caleb is trying to make highlight plays. Gotcha. And when you do that, that is a problem in the NFL from where I sit. Again, where does he go? How do they work with him? All that stuff is going to ultimately decide how successful he is. He's still my number 2 because the talent is clearly there. The ability is clearly there. I have a question on if he's trying too hard to be the sexiest quarterback in the NFL and in the NFL draft. And if he is, how is that going to impact things when things eventually go wrong? Because I don't care who you are in the NFL, eventually things are going to go wrong. And if you're that dude who's obsessed with trying to be the dude, trying to be the guy on ESPN, I have concerns with that. So he's my number 2. My number 3 is JJ McCarthy. And yes, this is mostly an upside thing. Some of it's an authenticity thing. Again, I know, he hasn't thrown the ball a whole lot in Michigan, but you know what? What coach out there wouldn't lean on a super strong run game, lean on a super strong defense? I don't have a problem with Michigan doing it because I feel like the reason they did it was not because they don't trust JJ, but because they trusted everything else they had around JJ. And that's exactly what you want your coaching staff to do. So JJ is my number 3 guy. Drake May is my number 4, but I got to admit, I'm with you on that, Wig. When I watch North Carolina tape and I watch North Carolina games and I watch Drake May, I don't feel it. Like I just don't feel like the hot iron and the fire pit attraction, you know what I mean, that I feel like you should if you think this guy's a franchise quarterback. Michael Penix Jr. is a very close 5 for me, and then Bo Nix is my number 6.
All right, so let me give you some comments. I got a video that I quoted on the X app yesterday. Mm-hmm. It's 2 minutes of Jaden Daniels throwing the ball in the middle of the field, and so in a nutshell, we're talking about in a vacuum here,
right?
2 minutes of throws for 2 seasons, that's not a lot. Nope. It sounds like a lot. It sounds like a long video. There's probably 25 throws in the middle of the field. That's not a lot. That's, right. In 25 games, that's an average of like 1 time a game that he made a completion. And I know they probably put every completion on there. He can do it. I think with Caleb, I agree about 90% with your sentiment. I don't think he's doing it for ESPN though. What I think he's doing it for, I think he's doing it to show how good his bag is. And you can't play sports at a high level trying to show everybody your stuff. You have to be immersed into the game, into the game enough where you're falling back on your mechanics, you're falling back on your technique. Sometimes you just need to trust the things around you and the things that you've done and the work that you put in, and don't put so much of it on yourself. Right. The one example I always use for people that when I talk about a guy who's super talented, who was super talented, but had a very high variance between success and failure, was Jay Cutler. How many dudes have you seen with that arm? How many guys Jay Cutler and Aaron Rodgers used to have games when the Packers and the Bears played. And if you turn the volume down and just watch, you'd have been like, they're the same guy with that same whip it motion. The ball comes out. He can make every single throw. But the difference is Cutler always seemed like he wasn't present in the moment sometimes.
Right.
And you run the risk of thinking that Caleb Williams is Aaron Rodgers, when if he's not focused, he could be Jay Cutler. And now talent-wise, not a big difference.
Right.
Here, admittedly, I know I'm saying that about Aaron Rodgers, and everybody's like, are you crazy? But, Aaron Rodgers like the Kanye of the NFL, right? But no, but you know what I mean? I'm talking about just purely football, not all the other stuff and the mushrooms and going in caves. I ain't talking about none of that. I'm talking about just on the football field. I'll never accuse Aaron Rodgers of not being in the moment. I think Jay Cutler, sometimes he got lost a little bit. And that's sad because I think he had Hall of Fame talent.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And look, A-Rod, for everything that he is and isn't on the football field, he's all about football. He's all about the business on the field. So I think everything you said was amazing. I think it's all great. And like I said, with the Caleb Williams thing, if you're out there and you're super offended by it, I've already admitted it's something that I can't evaluate. Right. Like I'm not in the meetings with him. I didn't coach him. I'm not on the coaches. So it's something that I can't properly evaluate, but it is a concern that I have. And so I've got to be upfront and honest with it. So great stuff, Wig. I think we gave people a lot to talk about. Don't be afraid. Let us know what you think in the comment section. If you differ, if you agree, go ahead and let us know. And definitely go check out that cut up of Jaden Daniels throwing over the middle. Look, I'll tell you, Wig, he is one of the fewest of these quarterbacks. I looked this up on Sports Info Solutions recently, and he does have one of the fewest number of over the middle passes of these quarterback prospects. But he also has the highest completion percentage of those passes. Right. So the question is that the Commanders presumably have to answer or at least feel comfortable with is, can he not do it, or did they just not ask him to do a lot? So we'll find that out on if you believe his coach, who did an interview after his pro day and said he's going to make a lot of good plays for Washington. The deal might already be done, but Kevin Ostreicher is coming up Monday for more Locked On NFL. Locked On Ravens host is going to be with you after the weekend, so make sure you come back through for that. For your second listen of the day, check out Locked On Jags, Locked On Commanders, or stay right here and head over to Locked On Sports Today, the 24/7 sports streaming channel on YouTube. As always, thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day every day. Thanks for coming through on a consistent basis like you do every day. For Tony Wiggins, I'm David Harrison. We'll be right back here next Friday with another episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.